Now, the last time my guest this evening was in a leadership position in government, Donald Trump was just an obscene billionaire with crazy hairstyle, and the BRICS group of countries was on the rise. And how times have changed in the last couple of years. This is The Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight I'm joined by the former finance minister. He's the deputy chairman of Rothschild South Africa, and a man who convinced Pravin Gordhan to take the job as head of SARS. Trevor Manuel joins me. Okay, let's talk about South Africa. I mean, we've got a number of those pillars that Neil Ferguson talks about in terms of the opportunity for populism to rise. There's an immigration issue, and we see xenophobia rearing its head in South Africa from time to time. There's a financial crisis. There is inequality. All of these factors very present in South Africa. The demagogue hasn't risen yet. Maybe Julius Malema thought he was the demagogue. Local government elections suggested perhaps not yet, or maybe at some point in the future. We look at global trends. How do they play out here?
Look, I think that one of the big issues that we need to try and understand about South Africa is why it's been so difficult to recover from the 2008 financial crisis. And sure, there are a range of exogenous factors. In the beginning, commodity price downturn was very heavy. I think that there's also a long pipeline of issues with the education system not producing people who are adequately skilled. But I do think that one of the big challenges is that government and the private sector and the trade unions are not in conversation. And I certainly am in great admiration for the CEO initiative, for the work being led by Jabu Mabuza. In general terms and in support of Pravin Gordhan in particular, that's a very strong signal. But what is very clear is that is not, I don't think you get the same warm fuzzy feeling from CEOs and the private sector in general towards all of government.
I was chatting to Rolf Meyer the other day and said, could you have negotiated with Cyril Ramaphosa the settlement of the early 1990s in a world of social media? And he said, probably not. Simply because social media has changed the dynamic so much. Information flows so much more quickly. There's so much more transparency. But then explain to me, please, the phenomenon that is the president who is able to, even by a thin thread, hold on to power despite the tsunami of accusations, some evidence, and just the temperature of the country.
Well, I think that I'd like to take a step back from that. 2 years ago, President Michelle Bachelet, the sitting Chilean president, delivered the Nelson Mandela lecture in Cape Town. And she made an interesting point about the fact that all information is available in real time. But to a large extent, our democracies haven't caught up. So we have elections every 4 or 5 years. And we expect that people will have the information from us at that kind of frequency. But nobody hangs around waiting for the 7 o'clock news. Information is available in a different time frame. And I think the point I'd made earlier about institutions kind of having outlived their usefulness in the current milieu is very apposite in politics. The problem, I think, that confronts us is that part of our political system was designed, I think, for a particular set of circumstances. The proportional representation system, I think, has to work in South Africa. It has to work because if you didn't have it work, sheer demographics would increase an ANC majority even more. The problem, however, is that it creates a dependence on the party. And that dependence on the party means that conscience is actually nullified. And I think that is greatly disturbing. The other issue that it creates is that so much power is vested in a single individual. The power to appoint cabinet. And you know, there's never been a secret from seniors in the ANC saying that the matters of the 9th of December last year were the dismissal of Nhlanhla Nene and the appointment of Des van Rooyen, the removal of Mwako Ramatlhodi from the minerals portfolio into public service, and the move of Msebenzi Zwane in. None of that was cleared with the ANC. It's all the decisions of a single individual. The Constitution grants him that right. But I think that there has to be a subtext about how that right is exercised. I mean, you wouldn't get Theresa May, who doesn't even have a constitution in the UK, taking wild decisions. Like maybe Boris Johnson was a bit of a wild card. We'll see how that pans out in the fullness of time. But I think that those constraints have always been there in the parliamentary system, which doesn't exercise that authority in South Africa. Similarly, the ability to appoint commissions, and I think that was dealt with in the State of Capture report. The ability to appoint our diplomatic corps, ambassadors and high commissioners, is very worrisome. There are too few checks and balances, and then all of cabinet being dependent
on the largesse of an individual.
On the largesse of an individual, which I think creates difficulties when you have moments such as votes of no confidence in Parliament. And this, I think, is what worries people. And unless we can have rational discussions about these kinds of matters, I don't quite understand how you begin to change the overall environment, which I say must have trust as a core element.
But trust is gone. Trust is broken.
Trust is
How
broken.
do we restore trust?
You see, I think that you might have to foment some kind of crisis of sorts. I mean,
do we need a downgrade? Is that too much of a crisis? I mean, that comes with multi-year consequences. Or is the downgrade a catalyst for the excuse to remove Pravin Gordhan as finance minister if all other avenues fail?
It could be all of the above. The problem about a downgrade is that unless your mind is focused on the consequences of more expensive debt.
We already spend, 146, 147 billion rand a year just in interest.
Just in interest, you see. And unless a cabinet is focused front and center on economic policy management, these issues don't actually apply.
We got a distracted government, a distracted cabinet, a cabinet with, it's a bit like the Ides of March, and people are watching their backs to see where Brutus puts the next knife in.
No secret. On the 9th of December last year, during the day, there was a cabinet meeting where Minister Nene was giving a presentation on the state of the economy. They didn't conclude the discussion. They were meant to come back a week later. He was fired that evening. It says to me that there's major distraction simply because these things appear not to matter. And that's exceedingly worrisome, because I know that when the cost of debt rises, government has less available for services, and the people who are then more dependent on services suffer the most. And that's poor in South Africa.
And that's where the rise of the demagogue comes from, because you fail the majority of people over time.
Exactly.
But that's inevitable. There's the playbook. How do we get the confidence?
You know, I'm saying that I don't know whether the downgrade matters, because some of the decisions, BRICS recently met, and the chair of the BRICS Business Council in South Africa is the chief executive officer of Eskom. And one of the decisions they took was to establish their own rating agency. Now, I have a very basic view of this. You can take your lapdog and call it a rating agency. You can.
I've got membership cards to my own fan club in here if you'd like to sign one. I'll sign one for you.
But you know, none of it matters. What matters is whether the people who you need to borrow from believe the ratings agency. That's the only thing that matters here. Most finance ministers around the world hate rating agencies. We have stand-up rows with them.
It's the way it should be, isn't it?
We have stand-up rows with them. They're not our friends, but they've performed a vitally important function in convincing the managers of capital that the investment is sound. Now, if you look at just in preparation for the visits from S&Ps and Moody's in the course of the next few weeks, the way in which they apply their minds to the ratings, the one aspect is always just the economics. Will the economy grow at pace sufficient to service the debt? Basic question. The second issue is there a policy management process that is rational and ordered? And in respect of the latter, where you've had all of this, since S&Ps and Moody's were here in June, you've had Minister Zwane arguing
about regulation of the banks.
About regulation of the bank. If you have that kind of thing, you must not expect the rating agencies to take your policy matrix seriously.
And that's the real crisis of confidence that we face, the next crisis of confidence we face. We've gone way over time, and I thank you for being so generous with your time. But do we look back a year from now and say it was a terrible nightmare? 2 years from now, was it a 5-year, it was a terrible nightmare?
You know, for me, the saving grace of 2016 for us in South Africa has been the courts.
Yeah.
And I think that we aren't doing enough to explain to all South Africans the value of the judgment, the consensus judgment of the 31st of March, which was delivered by the Chief Justice Mogoeng.
Which was the payback, the money judgment.
Which is so profound,
yeah.
But it speaks about what it means to be in a constitutional democracy and everything else that derives off that. But that, I think, has been the saving grace, and that's why I think 2016 may prove itself to be a watershed year.
So in a year's time, do we look back and say, whew, that was close?
I think that
2 years? 3
no,
years?
I think that's been our saving grace. But I don't know how the rating agencies are going to see it because growth is non-existent, and the policy frame, which can be recalibrated by a government that cares, is still very much out of kilter.
Trevor Manuel, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you very much for joining us this
Bruce.
evening. Former Finance Minister, he is currently Deputy Chairman of Rothschild in South Africa, Trevor Manuel. Other big issues, of course, to discuss on Future Moneymakers. Till next time, have yourselves a very good evening. Good night.